So, I've already built my city for Legions Imperialis, but the great thing about working with such tiny figures is, when it comes to terrain, you can go really big. And in this video, I decided I wanted to try and do something a little bit more epic. And I've talked about doing a spaceport, so I figured let's give that a go. Now, everything I've done so far has all been in like the modern day style of things, but obviously Warhammer 40k or 30k as the case may be, is all that gothic madness. And I went off and I tried to find a load of different files to do this, and ultimately my inspiration came because I'm almost through reading the entire Horus Heresy, which has taken a very long time. And recently I read one of the most boring books in which there is a siege on the Lionsgate spaceport, and even though the book was really boring, considering we're at such a tense point of the Horus Heresy, the setting and everything was really intriguing to me. They have this big spaceport, they have all these big space bridges coming off of it, massive walls that kind of go up into the mountains. So I figured I wanted to try and do something similar for my Legions Imperialis games. The aim would be just to have something that's a bit more of an objective. You've got to try and siege a spaceport, and I wanted to try and make something modular. So this is like part one of this video, in which I'm doing like the first part of it just to get a feel of what I actually wanted. So all the filament I'm using in this video was sent over by Chitu Systems, and it's their Jamhe Conjure series. Anything that you see that's either in the white or the black filament, that was all sent over to me. It's not a sponsored video, but just want to say thanks to them for sending this over to help me complete this project. So one of the first things I needed to do was find all the different files that I was going to use for this project, and I found these really interesting ones. They're like these modular gothic building types, and they all kind of clip together, you can stack them. It comes with things like the gates as well that you can use. And then I also needed some kind of like temple bits, and I found some of those on cults as well. I'll have all of these bits listed down below. This is all part of one set, and then I've got the temple bits as part of another set. I figured since this was going to be a landing pad, I would also need to get some bits there as well, and have those linked down below. And the great thing is you can resize those landing pads to kind of go in different places. Now that I had the files that I was going to be working with, I actually needed to do a little bit of planning. And normally I don't do this. Normally I just kind of go wild. But because these aren't in like any kind of form already, you just need to figure out what you actually want. I had to kind of sketch out my plan for the landing pad. And initially the design was going to be that it was going to be like this almost mountain that was coming out with some walls and bits coming out of it, and then these big landing pads. And I wanted to have these 3 big landing pads. But then as I started to get into it, and because everything's very square, I didn't have as much freedom to kind of move things around. I decided to go with this just one big blocky design. So it'd have this big landing strut coming out of the front of it. And then I kind of toyed with the idea of having 4 different landing struts, but I wanted to make this like the first part of like my spaceport. So the idea was it's going to be almost this big giant cathedral with this space bridge coming out of the front of it, which would have a landing port on it. And then I figured in the future, this could maybe be the top part of this massive giant space wall and spaceport. I could have like the mountainscape down below it in the future, have this on top of it, and have multiple space bridges and spaceports coming out of it, and it would look epic. But I just wanted to test it out and see how this looked. So once I settled on the design, it was time to get everything printing. And because they're relatively small, all of these pieces, it was time to go wild. Now, one thing to bear in mind, and this is just a pro tip for anything when it comes to 3D printing, is keep some of these initial parts in your slicer so that way you can always compare things. For example, these massive space bridges or the landing ports, I had to scale them up. So I scaled them up to 300%, but I wanted to make sure that they would fit perfectly with the rest of the stuff. So I wanted to make sure that this fit, so I was able to take that bit in the slicer, drop it over the top of some of these blocks that had already been assembled within the slicer, and I could make sure that everything was basically perfect dimensions. The last thing I wanted to do was spend time printing off loads of these like space bridge parts, then put them next to this and find that either these were too small or my space bridge would be too small. So you can play around with it in the slicer. So always try and keep some of your original files at the scale that you've printed them off at, so that way you can compare them to what you're printing off in the future. So that took some time, and I got everything printed off, and then it was time to glue these things together. Now I was running out of my usual super glue that I normally use, and also the fact that this would take up a lot of bottles of these super glue. So I used my Uhu glue, which isn't just good for sticking together bits and making them look like they have big gory blood effects. It's actually quite good for sticking together all of these large prints, or multiple little prints in this case. Now, the great thing about this set as well is it comes with all these like frame scaffolding pieces that you can use to flesh it all out. So rather than having to print off all these bits of all the detail and take up loads and loads of filament or resin, depending on how you're printing it, you can print off all these scaffolding bits that go basically inside of it. So I've got all the outside of it is all the nice detail bits, it's nice and thick, and then on the inside, just to give it a bit more structural integrity, that was difficult to say, I've got all of these scaffolding bits that basically help to flesh it out and stop it from basically compacting and squashing together. It does add a bit of weight, but it's definitely worth it. I got it all glued together, let that set, and then it was over to the spray painting stage. So for anything that's going to be metallic, I really like hitting it all with like silver rattle can first, and then using a gold rattle can over the top of it. It probably should be the other way around, so that way the silver is like a highlight, but I like doing the gold over the top because it gives it almost like a brassy type look. It gives it a weathered look, makes it look like the building's meant to be silver, and then it's rusted and it's just been destroyed by the elements over time, and I like the way this looks. And next up, I think I'm going to try using maybe a black oil wash over it with some brown oil wash over it as well, just to give it some weathered appearance. And then I'll go back in there with some paint and pick out bits like on the front of the space bridge, for example. We've got these like curtain bits or banner bits. We'll just see how that turns out. So now that everything was sprayed and primed and pretty much ready to go, I needed to figure out how to do all the detail bits, and I figured just keep it simple, so I mixed up a couple of oil washes. For this, I did like a black oil wash, and I also did a couple of brown oil washes on there just to kind of get a bit more rust in there and just pick out some of the details. And obviously I needed to do a lot of oil washing. At first, I was going to go for like a more traditional wash instead and then go back in with like a dry brush of silver, but I wasn't too sure how much that would then knock out some of the golds I put on there and maybe get rid of some of the like rusty old weathered effects. Once everything was done and dry, I left it for about 24 hours and then came back in. I didn't wipe off any of the oil because it just looked fine, and anywhere that it kind of like pooled and stuff, I figured it would just make a nice kind of like a weathered look. I just went back in and picked out a few more colors. So like on the space pad, for example, on all like the towers and bits there and the angel's wings, I added some golds and I added some coppers around there as well, and just to pick out a few more bits. I've not gone mad on this yet because obviously I want to maybe explore some more bits to put in there in the future. I'm not entirely sure what the color scheme is going to be, so I didn't want to dedicate myself to something and then have to come back in and change it all, because that would just be a bit of a nightmare. So I added in a few colors, and then I grabbed a few pigment powders as well and just popped that on top of there. And I figured, obviously, all the dust that's going to be blowing off this mountain and just all the residue and everything else, all the acidic polluted rain that's coming down, because, you know, Terra's not a nice place to live in the 30k. So here we go. And then once all of my powders and things like that were on there, I called it done. Now at this stage, I'm really happy with how this project is looking. I just think it looks really fantastic. It's a great starting point to use. And my thoughts are, for the next part of this project, I'm going to have this as like one of the top areas of it, or like one of the bits that's jutting out of the mountain. And the idea is that I'm going to try and do a bit of sculpting. So I've got all my sculptor mold and bits like that, and I'm just going to figure out how to make like a bit of a mountain for this to be coming out of. The part that I want to have beneath this will be like this big space hangar, so this kind of like open bit. And I'll probably use some like the terrain pieces I've got, like all like the walkways and stuff like that, to make a hangar, have this big opening, and then this bit could maybe sit on top of it, and then maybe have some of the walls have like this big walkway along the side, and just go from there. I'd like it to remain modular, so like this top piece, for example, I can just drop it into the city if I want to, and you could have this as one objective or one outpost that's on the city, and you've got the Imperium guarding that just to kind of hold it. And then if you wanted to, you could stack these up and you could have them all alongside. So it'd be like this massive wall with bits where you've got aircraft that can land on it. So I'm not too sure where it's going to go yet, but I know I want a mountain and I know I want to sculpt that. So let me know in the comments, what ideas would you like me to explore for this? I like the way this is looking so far. It looks very gothic. It looks very big and grand. And when you put it next to all the miniatures, it really stands out. And it's definitely going to be a lot of fun for my players to fight over. So like I said, throw down any ideas you've got for this, anything you'd like me to explore, and any recommended terrain pieces as well that you know that exist out there that I can print off, because I've had a lot of fun with this. I just want to say a quick thank you to Shitu Systems for sending over the filament for this. I'll have it linked down below as well, so if you want to check it out for yourself. It's really nice, easy to work with filament, definitely worthwhile checking out. And as always, thanks so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, hit that like and subscribe button. It goes a massively long way. Also have a Patreon page, and if you really want to support us, then head on over to Into the AM, where you can get some of these t-shirts and you get a nice little discount. And I have all that linked down below, and yeah, grab yourself something cool to wear. And fingers crossed, I will see you in the next one.